8 pills every single morning. I used to lay them out on the kitchen counter in a little row. Some were small and white, one was yellow, a couple were capsules I couldn't even identify by sight anymore. I'd line them up, swallow them with my orange juice, and think nothing of it. That's just what this looks like, I told myself. This is what 67 is. I'm 84. I take 0 prescriptions, not one. And the way I got there is the thing nobody in a white coat ever sat down and walked me through. I spent 32 years as a registered nurse. I believed in medicine. I still do. But believing in medicine and being blindly obedient to a system that stopped questioning what was actually in your body, those are two very different things. It took me getting sick, really sick, before I understood the difference. But let me back up, because the way I got to 8 medications in the first place is a story a lot of you are living right now without realizing it. It started simply enough. Blood pressure crept up in my early 60s. My doctor put me on a low-dose ACE inhibitor. Fine, reasonable. But that medication gave me a dry cough that wouldn't quit. Middle of the night, every night. So he switched me to a different drug, a calcium channel blocker, and added a diuretic alongside it because my pressure still wasn't where he wanted it. The diuretic caused my legs to swell slightly and made me feel like I needed to run to the bathroom every hour and a half. That disrupted my sleep. So now I had a sleep problem. Something was prescribed for that too. That sleep medication, and I say this as a former nurse who should have caught this sooner. That medication blunted my stomach acid production as a side effect, which triggered reflux that I hadn't had before. And what do you get for reflux? Another pill. You see what's happening. One pill creates a side effect. The side effect gets treated with another pill. That pill causes something else, and on until you're standing at the pharmacy counter every month, spending more on prescriptions than you spend on groceries, and nobody has stopped once to ask whether the first pill was still doing anything useful in the first place. That's called a medication cascade, and it is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most under-acknowledged health crises in this country for people our age. Here's what made it worse, and what I didn't fully understand, even with 3 decades of nursing behind me. Your body at 65 is not your body at 45. Your liver at 65 metabolizes drugs somewhere between 30 and 40% more slowly than it did when you were younger. Your kidneys, which clear medications from your bloodstream, may be working at half the efficiency they once did, which means that the dose your doctor prescribed when you were in your 50s, a dose calibrated for a younger body, could be quietly accumulating to dangerous levels inside a body that can no longer clear it fast enough. And I can tell you from my years on the floor that dose adjustments for age-related organ decline are made almost never. Your annual wellness visit is not designed to catch this. It is designed to check boxes. I didn't figure this out on my own. I figured it out because of a woman I worked alongside for almost a decade in the hospital, a pharmacist who became one of the sharpest people I have ever known. She retired 2 years before I did. We stayed in touch. And when she found out how many medications I was on, she got very quiet on the phone in a way that told me everything. She wasn't my pharmacist. She had no official standing in my care. But she sat with me for 3 hours one afternoon, and we went through every pill, every original diagnosis, every timestamp of when the prescription had been written, and whether anyone had revisited it since. What we found was not reassuring. 2 of my medications were treating conditions that my own blood work suggested had resolved or significantly improved. 1 dosage had never been adjusted downward, despite a kidney function number that, in her words, should have prompted a conversation a long time ago. I need to stop here and say something clearly. She did not tell me to stop anything, and I am not telling you to stop anything. What she told me was this: you need to have a real conversation with your doctor, and if he doesn't have time for it, you need to find someone who does. What I didn't know then, and what most people over 65 still don't know, is that there is a service built into Medicare Part D called Medication Therapy Management. It's a full review of every single medication you take, conducted by a clinical pharmacist, covered at no cost to you. They look at interactions, they look at dosages relative to your current organ function. They flag medications that have been on your list longer than your original condition warranted. You can call your Medicare plan today and request this. Most people never do because nobody tells them it exists. I requested it. I was nervous going in. I'd been on these pills for years. My identity, in some uncomfortable way I hadn't fully admitted to myself, had become tangled up with them. I think a lot of people know what I mean by that. When you've been told for long enough that you need something to function, you start to believe it in a way that goes deeper than logic. The pharmacist who conducted my review was thorough and kind. She identified 3 medications that she felt warranted a serious conversation with my physician about tapering. Not stopping, tapering. She was clear about that distinction because she knew, and I knew, that stopping certain medications abruptly is not just uncomfortable, it can be dangerous. Blood pressure medications, benzodiazepines, proton pump inhibitors. These all require a gradual, supervised reduction. Your body has to be walked down, not pushed off a cliff. Anyone who tells you otherwise, or any video online that implies you should just flush your pills and replace them with a supplement, is not your friend. But something else had happened in the months leading up to that review, something that I think matters more than any of the clinical details I just gave you. After my cancer surgery in 2009, I changed how I moved and what I ate, not because a doctor prescribed it. Honestly, not a single physician mentioned either one as part of my treatment plan. I changed because I was 67 years old and I had just had part of my colon removed, and I decided in a quiet and furious way that I was not going to be passive about whatever life I had left. I started walking, not fast, not far at first, but every morning without exception. I built up to about 45 minutes a day, and I started paying serious attention to what was on my plate. What happened to my blood work over the following 18 months surprised even me. My blood pressure numbers improved without any adjustment to my medications, which should have been a signal that a medication adjustment was warranted, but wasn't flagged. My fasting insulin dropped. My inflammatory markers, the ones that had been quietly elevated for years, came down measurably. These are the exact numbers that had originally justified several of my prescriptions, and they were moving in the right direction. from nothing more than daily walking and cutting out the foods that I now understood were driving inflammation. I'm not telling you walking is magic. I'm telling you it is, for many people, genuinely underestimated in its clinical power. There is solid research showing that somewhere around 7,000 to 8,000 steps a day reduces cardiovascular risk in older adults in ways that compare favorably to what certain medications achieve. That's not fringe. That's published in serious journals. And the cost is a decent pair of shoes. Around the same time, a neighbor of mine, a man in his early 70s, who I had watched manage type 2 diabetes for years, started doing resistance training. His daughter had practically dragged him to a class at the community center. He was embarrassed about it, called it an old ladies' class, which made me want to flick him in the ear. 6 months later, he called me to tell me his doctor had begun walking back one of his glucose medications because his insulin sensitivity had improved enough to make it unnecessary. He was stunned. His doctor, to be honest, seemed a little stunned too. Strength training does this. Not for everyone, not as a replacement for medical care, but for a meaningful portion of people over 60 with metabolic issues. Building muscle changes how the body handles blood sugar in ways that can reduce pharmaceutical need. The research on this is not new or controversial. It is simply ignored in most clinical conversations because writing a prescription takes 30 seconds and prescribing a lifestyle takes 30 minutes that nobody has. Now here is the part that took me the longest to understand, and that I think is actually the hardest part of all of this. By the time I had the evidence in my own blood work, real numbers, real improvement, I was still afraid to come off some of those pills. Logically, I understood what the data was showing, but there was a voice underneath the logic that said, what if you need it? What if the numbers go back up? What if this is the thing that's keeping you here? That voice is not rational, but it is incredibly powerful, and it is documented. People who are psychologically certain they cannot function without a medication respond measurably less to lifestyle interventions, even when those interventions are objectively working. The belief itself becomes a barrier to the evidence. What broke it for me was time. Just watching my own numbers month after month with my own eyes, seeing that my blood pressure was already doing what the pill was supposed to be doing, seeing the inflammation markers, seeing my doctor's face shift gradually from polite skepticism to something closer to genuine interest. When he finally had enough data in front of him to feel confident proposing a supervised taper on one medication and then eventually another, it felt less like a leap of faith and more like the logical conclusion of something I'd already proven. The process took years. I want to be honest about that. I went from 8 medications to 0 over the course of about 4 years. It was not linear. There was a period where I tapered off one thing and something else had to be temporarily adjusted. There were months where a number moved in the wrong direction, and we paused. My doctor was not thrilled about every step. He was cautious, which is his job, and there were moments where his caution frustrated me and moments where I was grateful for it. I also want to say something about the medications that stayed the longest and were the hardest to address. The ones that had been flagged as high risk for people my age, sleep aids, antihistamines used regularly, certain acid reducers taken long term. There is a published list put together by the American Geriatric Society that specifically identifies drugs that carry elevated risk for people over 65. Increased fall risk, cognitive effects, hospitalization. My doctor had never mentioned this list to me. The clinical pharmacist knew it by heart. That gap between what specialists know and what gets communicated to patients in a 15-minute appointment is where a lot of people get hurt quietly and without anyone noticing. I am 84 years old. I walk every morning. I have not had a cancer recurrence in 15 years. I cook almost every meal in my own kitchen. I take care of my husband, who needs more help now than he used to. And I do that without being foggy or over-medicated or worried that something in my cabinet is interacting with something else in my cabinet in a way nobody ever sat down to check. I am not telling you this is your story. I am telling you it became mine. And I almost missed it because I trusted a system that was never designed to ask the questions that actually mattered. Ask those questions. Call your Medicare plan this week and ask about medication therapy management. Bring your full medication list to your next appointment and ask specifically whether every item on that list has been reviewed against your current lab values and your current organ function. Ask if the dose you are taking was ever adjusted for where your body is now, not where it was when the prescription was first written. And then go home and take a walk. Not because I told you to, because your body has more capacity for change than anyone has probably given it credit for. I know mine did, and I had to get very sick before I stopped taking that for granted. If this landed somewhere real for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Ask me in the comments what question you've been afraid to bring to your doctor. And if you want more conversations like this one, stick around.